Welcome to my podcast on real relationships. My name is Sophie Bassan and I am a relationship expert, international speaker and best-selling author of the book Your Other Half. I decided to start this podcast because, in my opinion, relationships are currently not being portrayed as what they really are. Whether you're watching the news, TV, or social media, the perception given to people is wrong. And my aim is to talk about what happens in the real world, talk about real stories, and listen to what real people think, do, or go through, as opposed to creating expectations of something that doesn't actually exist. I may not agree with everything that is said by my guests, but it is their chance to express their opinions and their stories. And here today we have Andrew Payne, and we are going to talk about dads and custody. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm good, thank you. You?
Yeah, very good, very good.
Good. So tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Yeah, well, I'm happily married. I'm a dad to 5 kids. I've got 3 boys under 8 through my second marriage. And that's all hunky-dory. And then my 2 older daughters were from a former marriage where I was the victim of long-term domestic abuse from 1999 to 2008. The marriage ended 2009. And then my daughters lived with my now ex-wife for the first few years, but then they were eventually moved by the courts to my custody. Which you'd have thought, well, after that, I'm sure everything was great. It was real challenges, really complicated parenting situations we found ourselves in. And then years later, my ex-wife took us back to court to try and reverse the decision, which was, you'd have thought, well, I'm sure it would have been fine. It actually was really difficult, all kinds of things at play. But in the end, she wasn't successful in reversing that decision. And then as for myself, I work with business leaders, helping them to avoid burnout and coaching them, developing their leadership skills is the kind of stuff that I do. So yeah, I've got a real heart for all things related to custody, parental alienation, family court, because it's a really tough thing to go through. And I have a lot of contact with dads, particularly who are struggling in family courts, and want reassurance or whatever. And some of the stories you hear are just awful.
And I think that the problem is obviously that, and for the kids, it's not good either, because you've obviously got the divorce and the parents splitting up, but then there's this almighty fight taking place.
Yeah, and I think so. On the one hand, you have parental alienation, where usually, but not always, the mother, who's usually but not always the resident parent, will start to try and break down the relationship between the child and the parent. Now, some people that say parental alienation doesn't exist say, well, it's not possible to break that relationship down. Others would say it entirely is. It happens all the time. But the resident parent can mess about contact. They can block contact. And then to go through the family courts can take months and months. And then when CAFCAS, who are the independent body that advise the judge on what to do, the quality of the CAFCAS officers is hugely variable. The outlook of the CAFCAS officers is hugely variable. You just don't know what you're going to get. Some CAFCAS officers do hate men. Others are very balanced. Some are incompetent. Some are highly intelligent. And so you end up in the family court spending thousands of pounds. The cases drag on for months. The stakes couldn't be higher. You haven't seen your kids for months. And you may actually get a CAFCAS officer who's utterly incompetent. And so it's a really, really stressful time. But on the other hand, if we all say, well, look, parental alienation is awful, the kid needs to see the parent, we must just enforce this. You then have the flip problem that can happen where children are forced into contact with, frankly, abusive parents in the name of preventing parental alienation. So my passion is that we prevent parental alienation, and we also prevent the situation where children are forced into contact with abusive parents. My passion is that abusive parents are understood and tackled, but it's not easy because there isn't really a penalty for lying in the family courts. There's not perjury. You don't get perjury in the family courts. So the family courts don't have your individual case for very long. The courts are awash with lies and false allegations. And a lot of the people working in this just chaos are incompetent.
And the thing is, right, there's an element of perception, isn't it?
Say that again.
There's an element of perception.
Oh, yeah. And it unfortunately, you can spend £20,000, £30,000 and get nowhere. Even if you get a court order, It may be that the other parent messes that about. And some judges will be very traditional. Kids must live with mum, and very hard on dads. Other judges will say actually it should be 50-50 if it's all possible. Some judges, if there's allegations of domestic abuse, will insist that no contact can take place until those have been properly investigated, but that can take months. Yeah. So it's a very, very unhappy picture. And I think it's particularly relevant in terms of cases of domestic abuse. I always say domestic abuse and parental alienation, they go hand in hand, because after an abusive relationship breaks down, the abuser loses control. So how can they then get control over the person that's left? Well, the kids, that's the next thing to do. So it's the family courts, in my opinion, need a radical overhaul. That they are not fit for purpose as things stand.
And I think I recall, this is years ago, I was driving somewhere in West Sussex, and there was a billboard. So someone actually paid, for this billboard space. And I can't remember the exact words on it, but it was something along the lines of such and such with two names of kids. Dad is trying to contact you. Don't worry. We'll see you soon, or something like that. And 3 kisses at the end. And obviously that been put up on the way to school, house, I don't know. And I remember thinking, oh my God, to get to that level, to try and communicate with your kids. And the upshot of it, I can't remember the words, but it was something along the lines of, it's not that I don't want to see you,
Yeah. It's just, and I think when these cases are going through court, you'd have thought, well, if there's no proven allegations of domestic abuse, what would be wrong with dad seeing the kids, even in a contact centre of all things? But you get a CAFCAS officer that's got a different whim, and there's no contacts, and it can be a year, it can be 2 years, which is heartbreaking if your kid is particularly, well, it's heartbreaking at any age, but if your kid is like 1 or 2 and going through all those changes, and you were a good parent, attentive before the relationship breakdown. And this is why many people stay in abusive relationships, because they're frightened. They'd rather leave when the kids are older. When it gets to court, if the kids are 14 or 15, they've got a bit more say over what goes on, and what they say carries a bit more weight in court. Whereas a kid of 5 or 6, the courts won't particularly, unless there are major safeguarding concerns, the courts won't even talk to the 5-year-old or 6-year-old.
And the other thing as well, if you're talking 1 or 2-year-old, there's a good chance that they won't even remember you if you don't see them for a few months.
Yeah, I think there's definitely, I think from what I see, and I had a dad, in fact, recently who hadn't seen his 1-year-old for 8 months, and finally is getting some contact centre. But there has to be a really gentle introduction, because you're right, you say the kid doesn't want to be left with this adult that he doesn't know, and there's no punishment. There's no particular punishment. There's no punishment for lying, and that's why I think really there's not a clear understanding of domestic abuse. There's not a clear understanding of sort of up-to-date stuff with parental alienation and how abusive relationships work. It needs a radical overhaul. And suicide. If you talk to suicide specialists, parental alienation is a very common reason, along with post-traumatic stress disorder and financial crisis. Parental alienation is up there as one of the biggest drivers of suicide.
And of course, a lot of judges, or back in the day especially, more than now, but they used to see the mother as the obvious choice, as if being a mother is more important than being a dad.
Yeah. And again, I think there is some change now. You hear of more, it's more common that shared residency orders are now out there. I do think we are ahead of countries like America and Australia. I do think I know that Fathers for Justice have got a lot of flack for some of their stunts, but I do think there's a lot of groups that have done a lot of work to raise awareness, and I do think that it has changed. It has changed, and even in my small network of sort of friends, contacts, although going through court is painful and costly, and dads don't get to see their kids very quickly, and the mums, if there's no punishment for lying, generally, from what I see, the courts are supportive eventually of contact, and contact does happen, which is progress, because that wasn't the case 20, 30 years ago.
And obviously, it's actually also understanding how much that the dads suffer from not seeing the kids, because a lot of people don't seem to get that somehow.
Yeah, and also if you've, as in my case, in those early years when my daughters lived with my ex-wife, that your children are in the hands of an abusive person. Your children are in the hands of, because that person's abusive and volatile, they don't probably make the best decisions when it comes to safeguarding. That in all the time they're not with you, you're being slated, subtly, sometimes more overtly.
That's what I was going to go on about, poisoning the kids.
Yeah, and it is possible. Or it's, and sometimes it's the simple things where in abusive situations, so this is assuming you have contact. This is how kind of manipulators and abusers kind of create these very difficult situations for people that aren't abusive. So the clothes is a common problem. So I talk you through how this goes. So let's imagine I pick my daughters up from school on a Friday in their school uniform. They're living with mum. They come to me for the weekend. Sunday, I return them in a set of my clothes that they're wearing in Birmingham. Now, each time, of course, I'm sending their school uniform back. They've got to have their school uniform back. It always went back washed, ironed, shoes polished. But each time I'm losing an outfit, which is, that's okay. But in any normal, rational relationship, those clothes every month or so, there'd be a bag packed and they'd make their way back to Birmingham. But the clothes would never come back. And so then I'd be asking my ex-wife and asking, and they wouldn't ever come back. And then she'd be, my daughter would say, why are you shouting at mummy on the phone? It's like, well, I'm not shouting. I've just been asking for the clothes. And so those kind of games start to take place. We got to the point where, because I was like, well, I can't keep shelling out. By this point, I was living at home with my parents. And so in the end, I started sending them back on a Sunday wearing their school uniform, which they weren't mad keen on. And then they'd say, well, why are you sending us back in school uniform? How do I answer that one neutrally? I know that I can't say it's your mum's fault, because that puts them in the middle of the, that's damaging for them. How do I answer that one? Oh, you just are. Why? Well, because I just don't have the clothes for you. Why? So this is how, and the problem is in the family courts is if you say anything that could be construed as not neutral or antagonistic, if that gets reported to CAFCAS or the courts, you will be absolutely hauled over the coals for it in court. So it's really hard co-parenting post-relationship with an abusive person, because I've just given you a silly example. I mean, we could talk all day. I could come up with example after example after example where the abusive person creates these situations that make parenting really difficult. If you genuinely are committed to parenting neutrally, it makes it really hard.
And the thing is, you're kind of stuck with that person for the rest of your days in that way, because you'll always be the mother of your kids.
Yeah, I mean, I've found now, because my daughters are 16 and 19, I have virtually no contact at all. I can't remember the last time I had any contact with my ex-wife. And so I think that is over now, really. If my daughters got married, that would be a very interesting day. I'm not quite sure how that will work, because the level of acrimony is two-way, and it's difficult. It's difficult. But I think, you're definitely going to be, if you are parenting with co-parenting with an abusive ex-partner, you're definitely stuck until your kids are like well into their teens.
And I think, I recall a story of someone who he obviously had a relationship with this woman who already had 2 kids. I can't remember the exact ages, but let's go for like 5 and 8 or something. So he was with her for about 8 years. So you could argue that he partially raised these kids and kind of got to love them as his own up to the teenage years. And he also had a child with this person who turned on him. So he left when the child was 2. And he always said it was the most difficult decision he ever made. because obviously of leaving the child behind. Either way, the child's now 18, so we moved on. And he said he tried not to make dramas when she was being poisoned against him. But for him, having kids, he associates with heartache, because the other two he never saw again, which absolutely destroyed him. And with his daughter, he's had to really build that relationship slowly. And his aim was that at 18, she would choose to see him, because as a child, he knew she was poisoned from the things she was saying. But as a teenager, she had absolutely no interest in him, because she just wanted to go out with her mates.
Well, and that's some of the difficulty in custody, is that you could have a court order, but actually, as your child gets older, whatever order's in place needs to become a whole lot more flexible. And my encouragement to men where they feel like their teen not only doesn't live with them but doesn't want to see them is, but it is a stage of life. Listen, my teenage daughters live, they don't want to see a whole bunch of me particularly. They just want to be out with their mates. But obviously, once they're in their 20s, the fact that you did keep sending them something, and the fact that you did keep contact without pressure, they will remember that, and it is the teenage years are painful for resident parents, let alone non-resident parents, for different reasons. Teenagers are quite hard to handle.
And that's exactly what's happened with this situation, so to speak. But, it is difficult, because he was doing that in the hope that, there's no guarantee there.
No, there isn't. And it like I said, it's very difficult. And I think the argument that it's not possible to pollute children against a parent is just a nonsense. I think children and teens can be hugely manipulated, and can develop sort of irrational hatreds that then it's into their 20s before they fully mature. And obviously biologically, the front the cortex of part of the brain, the bit that develops long-term thinking, that doesn't mature into their mid-20s. So it's not until they're really into their 20s that their brain is actually fully matured anyway.
And there's also two sides to every story. So sometimes it takes them a long time to realise what actually happened.
Yeah.
As opposed to what they were fed in terms of information.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. But I tell you what I do think is that, and I see this, some of the men that contact me are desperate to get a 50-50 shared residency order, for fear that if they only see their kids a day or two a week, there's going to be some kind of a weak relationship or a weak bond there. And I don't think that's true. I think actually, as long as you work to develop a good relationship with your child in the time that you have them, if you are only just seeing them every other week, you can actually develop really, really close bonds. You are the dad, or you are the mother, it could be the woman. And I don't think you need to, of course, you want to, as a parent, fight for as much contact as you can get. It's right and proper to do that. But if at the end of the day, you're only getting a day or two a week, you can do a lot with that. You may not be able to do all their homework with them, and you may not be able to do all the things that you feel like a parent should be able to do, but you can create lifelong bonds with a child that age. You really can.
We're talking about custody at the moment in terms of when people are fighting, but a friend of mine decided to leave a partner. They were not married. They had 2 kids together and a house. And she's the one who decided to leave for no other reason that the feelings were gone. It'd been dwindling for about a year or two, and she just reached that conclusion. She's actually left the house to him because she thinks that he probably can afford it better than she can. And instead of taking the kids, so to speak, she wanted the house to be like somewhere where they felt secure during the point of breaking up. So they're doing 1 week, 1 week. So he has them for 1 week, she has them for 1 week, which she found hard at the beginning. But moving forward, she actually said, it's quite nice because I also get to do my own stuff as opposed to just like the odd weekend here and there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And a friend of my daughter's has always grown up 50-50. Dad doesn't live that far away from mum. I don't think they get on that well, but they're quite civil. They've been quite civil since the breakdown.
They've not been perturbed in that way, shall we say?
No. And that's the way to try and do it. And I do, I mean, I agree. I do find it, the parents that really try and break down that relationship, it's like, surely you want the time to go and date someone else and do your own thing and tidy the house. Surely you would want that. It's beyond belief. I really find it hard to understand people that want to kind of phase out the other parent, because like you say, it's much needed downtime. Having kids is exhausting.
Yeah, no, definitely. And then obviously there's the other side of it, where I recall the story when the parent was half, I don't know what you call it, half a nationality. No, that's not what I meant to say. Half English, half whatever it was. I don't want to say. And decided to, with the mother's agreement, to take the kids to a holiday to visit his family, and never return them.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
So that goes on.
It does happen. I think it's rare, but it does happen. And I do know of cases where the parent has been hauled back from France or Spain or wherever they are. I think certainly within Europe, it's harder to get away with doing that.
Yeah.
The authorities can go and get them and pull them back. But I don't know what the laws.
It's more difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, with other countries. But it's difficult. I think as much as you can do, you have to keep trying to put yourself in the child's shoes. You have to, even if the other parent is being utterly irrational, you have to try to be as neutral as you can be. Both that's good for your child's mentality, but also if it does go to the family courts, the more neutral you've been, the better you will fare. And I think the other thing, if you are struggling at the moment with issues of co-parenting with an ex-partner who's being a bit of a nightmare, just make sure, the one bit of advice I give, make sure every bit of your communication, every phone call, every text, every email, every WhatsApp message, whatever it is, every social media post is squeaky clean. Do not give your ex-partner the beautiful gift of aggressive text that they can put in front of the CAFCAS officer when you get to the family court. Don't go there. Keep being charming, keep being reasonable. If it gets really bad, then maybe see if a mediator can help first before you launch some kind of family court war, because it's expensive. But make sure, social media particularly, don't go and have a rant on social media, because even if you blocked your ex-partner, you may well have a friend who's now suddenly become the boyfriend of partner's friend. And, you have to become quite private in your opinions, maybe have a trusted circle.
And that's very difficult, because I recall a friend of mine leaving his marriage. The upshot of it is that he met someone else a year later, should we say, and was obviously with her. And the ex-wife or ex-wife-to-be contacted me asking for screenshots of him being in a relationship and the photos. And I was like, I'm sorry, but I can't do that. I cannot be in the middle and get involved. It's just not even fair you asking.
No. And yeah. So, I mean, I think you have to try to be the bigger person. But I think the temptation, and I do see this a lot, is where guys that contact me really have got themselves into a pickle because they've been antagonized. They've gone and had a rant, and then it's come and bit them on the nose in the family courts. You cannot let your guard. You have to be charming and reasonable and rational at all times.
And what about co-parenting when you don't agree with something that the other parent is doing?
Well, it's really hard. I think you have to try and have a reasonable conversation. It could be about when the child has a mobile phone. Some parents disagree on that and that kind of gadgetry. And it is it's really, really difficult. I think the main thing I would say, if there's an acrimonious relationship, then to some degree, what goes on with that other parent, you won't be able to influence it. So you do what you do, they do what they do. And that's all that can happen. If you've got a more of a positive relationship, then maybe that conversation can be had. But your ex-partner can't control what you do and what you see, as long as what you're doing is safe. And likewise for you, you can't control what your ex-partner is doing. If your ex-partner wants to buy your 6-year-old a phone and you don't want your 6-year-old to have a phone, well, it's tough. Yeah, that's the rub of divorce and relationship breakdown. They're with that person that amount of time. They're free to do what they want as long as it's safe and legal. and likewise for you.
And I guess it's a similar situation when the ex-partner finds a new partner that you don't agree with.
Absolutely. As long as that partner is respectful around your child, there are no safeguarding concerns, then that's it's tough. That partner's there, and it's hard, but you have to be the bigger person in relationship breakdowns. That's the rub of it.
And I suppose, what we really need is awareness of how it affects the child, because if people could be a bit more civil, we'd be halfway there, really.
Yeah, it has you listen, the acrimony, the fallout, parental alienation, where the child, a loving parent is squeezed out of a child's life, the slating,
You'll always be there, unfortunately.
Yeah, but the being too honest about the other parent for a child that's like 10, it's massively damaging. It's massively damaging. And we all need, as parents, where we're involved in relationship breakdown, to be the bigger person, to be putting the child first, and to be actually saying, is this really appropriate? Yeah, is this is the child's mum or dad? To that child, it's the mum or the dad. They don't need to know at the age of 9 that mum's a lying scumbag. They just don't.
No, definitely. So, Andrew, we're getting towards the end of our time together. So, any last pearl of wisdom you would like to share with us?
I think we've covered it. I think the key, my plea to anybody hearing this that feels like the relationship's not going well with custody, I think it's understanding that when they are with your ex-partner, it is up to her or him to, as long as it's safe, to do what they want. And if not, if you're not happy, to try and be honest, but polite and calm. And if you fear that there's going to be a reaction, just keep records. If you're getting threatening letters and texts, you must respond calmly and in a polite way, but just keep the records of their texts, because you never know when you might need them.
Right, Andrew, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was very nice talking to you. And for everybody else, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the show, then please subscribe, leave us a review, but more importantly, come back for the next episode. Thank you.